Alright gamers, we are back with another tier list. This one will be for the Suebi faction. Before I start the tier list, I just want to point out a few things. This is based off of my opinion on legendary and very hard battle difficulty. Next thing I want to point out is that you will see there will be some units that are not listed here because I have never used them. And there is also women that are part of the Suebi faction, which I also did a separate tier list for that as well. Starting off with the list, we have the spear units. The first unit on the list is the Germanic Tribesmen, which is a tier 0 garrison unit. And you can only get them through garrison, by the way, which they are absolutely trash. They don't even have javelins, nothing, and these are going right in D tier. The next spear unit is the Spear Levy, which this is a tier 0 as well. You start with this unit. It's not a very good unit, but the plus to them is they have javelins, so they're good at chasing cavalry or just like cannon fodder. But either way, they are going D tier as well. The next spear unit on the list is the Spear Brothers, which this is a tier 1 unit, costs 100 income per turn, and the income for what it's capable of is actually pretty good. It doesn't have very high melee attack weapon damage, as all spears don't really, but it has pretty decent melee defense, and it also has javelins as well. Early on, this unit is actually quite viable, and for that reason, I'm going to throw them in the B tier. Now we're on to Suebi's signature unit, the Spear Wall. The Spear Wall is a tier 3, costs 110 upkeep per turn, and it is actually extremely good for the price that it costs. The Spear Wall does not have very good melee attack or weapon damage, but it does have very high melee defense and decent armor, and also has javelins as well. And for that reason, I'm going to throw them in the A tier. If they did have higher melee attack weapon damage, I would throw them in the S tier, but they're a very good unit and you could use them to the end of the campaign. Next section you see is the club section, which every single one of the club units does have a bonus to melee infantry. The first one is the Club Levy, which is a tier 0. You can recruit these right away, and because of the bonus, and they also have javelins as well, they're not a very strong unit. However, the utilization of this unit is actually really good, and if you need it to control public order, like in a pinch, and you don't have a lot of gold, these are your go-to units, and for that reason, I'm actually going to throw these in the A tier. The next two club units you see are the Bloodsworn and the Wolf Warrior, so a tier 2 and a tier 3. Now, the Bloodsworn is a way better value unit over the Wolf Warriors. The Wolf Warriors is slightly better, but costs a bit more. They both have javelins as well, which is nice, and the bonus to melee infantry. However, I'm going to put the Bloodsworn in B tier and the Wolf Warriors in C tier. The next section is the sword section, which we have the Round Shield Swordsman, which is a tier 2 unit. It does have pretty high melee attack and weapon damage. However, the melee defense and armor is not the greatest. It has javelins as well, which is a plus. However, you can actually skip these and just use the Spear Brothers and then switch to the Spear Wall. However, it just depends on your playstyle, but for this reason, I'm going to throw them in the B tier. And finally, we have the Sword Masters, which is a tier 4 unit. They're pretty expensive, however, they're a very good unit. They do have Headhunt, and they also have the Wedge, which makes them deal a ton of damage, and for prolonged combat as well, because Headhunt actually increases the amount of damage you can do. And if you don't know how the tired system works, is that you do less damage as you get even more tired, which the Headhunt will actually bring your damage up, and for that reason, I'm going to throw them in the S tier. Now we're on to the cavalry section. We have the Germanic Scout Riders, which is a tier 2 unit. It only costs 90 upkeep per turn. It has pretty good melee attack weapon damage and charge bonus, and also has wedge as well. However, the downside is it doesn't have that good of armor, and the reload speed is actually pretty slow. However, I'm going to throw them in the B tier because they are actually pretty viable for most of the game. The next cavalry unit you see is the Riders of the Hunt, which is a tier 3 unit. It does have pretty good melee attack, charge bonus, and a couple abilities. However, the armor is not very good, and most of it's in its shield, which makes ranged units actually pretty effective against this unit. And me in general, I do prefer the Germanic Scout Riders. However, they're not terrible, and I'm going to throw them in the B tier as well. Final cavalry unit you see is the Noble Riders, which is a tier 4. The Noble Riders are expensive. Every tier 4 cavalry is pretty expensive. However, this one in particular does have a base cost that's reduced, and it also has a lot higher melee defense. However, the armor is a bit lower than most in its class, not including the horse factions. They're not a bad cavalry unit by any means, and for that, I'm going to throw them in the A tier. Next on the list is the range units, which I rate my range units a lot differently than everybody else. The way I rate them is after they use all their ammo, what's their usability like? The very first ones we have is the Dramatic Use, which is a tier 0. We all know they do a lot of damage, so we can get that out of the way. However, as soon as they're done with their ammo, they're basically useless, so I'm going to throw them in the D tier. The next range unit you see is the Horse Runners, which is a tier 3 unit. Now, these are probably one of the more unique units you can get because they have extremely high melee attack and weapon damage. So after you use all your javelins, they are actually very viable at chasing down range units and actually beating them. And for that reason, I'm going to throw them in the B tier. Now we have the Dramatic Slingers, which is a tier 1 unit. And for tier 1 slinger, they're just pretty average. I mean, they have the base range, base missile damage, nothing really too fancy about it. B tier. And finally, we have the Longbow Hunters, which is a tier 2 missile unit. It does have higher base missile damage, which is 40, but your average range, which is 125. Skirmish capabilities are non-existent, and anything melee combat related is also non-existent. However, I do prioritize range units, and like this one in particular, higher on my list because arrows are able to actually arc over other units, walls, etc. But this unit in particular has the snipe and stock. So snipe is basically you can shoot while remaining hidden, and also stock means you can run around the battlefield while remaining hidden. However, it is a completely unreliable mechanic. Sometimes it works, and it's like, why is that working? And sometimes it does work, and you're like, why is this not working? All things considered, they are a pretty decent range unit, and this could literally just be a skill issue. That being said, I'm going to throw them in the B tier. Last but not least, we have the general units, which is the Wooden Spears, Swordmasters, and Noble Riders. The Wooden Spears is actually a general or a garrison unit, and the defensive stats are actually worse than the spear wall. The biggest thing of a spear unit is it has to have high melee defense or defensive stats because hoplites are more defensive over aggressive, and the Wooden Spears is pretty much just an average or actually below your average general, if anything. And for that reason, I'm going to throw them in the B tier. I do not prefer them as a general. The Swordmasters are a way better bet for a general, and they're going S tier. And me in general, I do not prefer cavalry units for a general, just kind of period. And for that reason, I'm going to throw them in the B tier. All right, gamers, we have reached the end of the tier list. If you have not played as Suebi before, I would suggest playing with them because they're one of the more unique factions. Other than that, thanks for watching. Peace out.